Hello and welcome. Are the words and terms that we're using to describe the circular economy proving to be as much of a barrier as, say, the practical stuff? If that's piqued your interest, the next 40 minutes could be for you. My name's Jo Miller. I am a circular economy learning consultant at the based in the UK, and I'll be hosting this broadcast. And like my guests, who I'll introduce you to in a minute, I've been working in this area for about 11 years now. And one of the most enduring topics of conversation that we often have, usually over a beer, is about the use of language and the words that are used to describe the circular economy. And we often talk about whether these words are actually leading to creating fundamental misconceptions about what the circular economy is and what it's not. So rather than having these conversations for the next 10 years, carrying on having these conversations, I thought we'd share what our thoughts are with you and see what you think. Let me introduce you to my guests around the table. On the right-hand side, I've got Ken Webster, who was a founding member of the MacArthur Foundation, currently a lecturer at the Exeter University Business School, and author of Circular Economy, A Wealth of Flows. Welcome, Ken.
Hi there.
And on his right or left, as you can see him, is Colin Webster, no relation, who is the learning consultant manager at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And Colin spends his time creating new and innovative resources to enable our understanding of the circular economy. And finally, Seb Edgerton-Reid, who has recently taken up the mantle of the learning program lead at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But before that was in the editorial team. So welcome and thank you for joining me. To make this a little bit more interesting, I've created a game called the Circular Economy Cards. Circular Economy Cards Against... No, let me start again. They're called the Cards Against the Circular Economy. And I'm trying to make it a little bit more interesting and pacey. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to ask you to choose a card, and on this card is a word that comes up time and time again in our conversations. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to read the word out, and then we'll give you a little bit of time to discuss that word in your own words, and we will pitch in as colleagues after you've had a little bit of time to think about it. So before we get started, I'd just like to have a little bit of think about words, why words and terms are actually important to us. And Ken, could you provide a little bit of context as to why words and terms might be?
I'll try. Words all come with points of view. And that may sound trivial. I know it's a line in a song. But if you just take Donald Trump's use of language, often very, very interesting. He was talking the other day about a corona flu, not the coronavirus. Now, why does that matter? You think, well, he doesn't get it, but in fact he does. The flu is something that's accepted. The flu is something we've had around for a long while. It's not as important. So choosing flu to put against corona rather than the proper term of virus de-emphasizes the disease. Just by adjusting that, which many people might not notice, or others would notice with satisfaction. Oh, I told you it was all not very important. It's just the flu with a fancy name. So if you go to just the circular economy context, people say, oh, well, let's do some more recycling. That's a circular economy, isn't it? As though what we were trying to do was simply go from the end of a linear take, make, and dispose economy and use a hammer and bend it back round to the beginning. Recycling just says, let's catch the materials at the end. Rather than any other notion, recycling is always associated with dealing with waste. So it's making a circle out of a straight line, with excluding, in a way, many other options which a different word would allow. If you said repurpose or remarket or repair, you get clearly many other associations. So just lumping it all together under recycling does a disservice to the other aspects of recovering products, components, and materials.
Well, interesting. Some of those words might come up today
I dare say
in
they will.
our Cards Against the Circular Economy.
I know some of the answers now.
Do you know some of the answers, Seb? Absolutely, you've been listening very carefully. Well, actually, because you've been listening very carefully and because you've got a double-barreled name, I'm going to make you start first. So here we are. We've got some words and terms that that come up time and time again. I'm going to get you to choose a card. Look at
Just
that. Cards Against Circular Economy. You
any-
can choose
any
any
card.
card you like, absolutely. And then let's read it out.
I'll take
No,
this
don't
one.
choose that one. There's no trickery here.
Oh dear.
You got Seb.
So the card says, closed loop. Companies need to close the loop on their products and materials to stop resource leakage if they are ever going to achieve circularity. So this is something that we encounter a lot, is that it's almost quite a popular idea, isn't it? Sometimes you talk about, I've seen people describe the circular economy, that there's a linear economy is a line, and then you bend that line back round to close the loop. And very often when you're talking to people in companies and businesses, they'll then say, they'll then apply that to their own business, that actually this is about what am I putting out into the market and how do I then, close that loop is kind of a popular expression. It's quite an obvious place to go when you think about the circular economy. So what's the problem with that? Why is that in this game?
Well,
Any thoughts?
well, do you want to have a go at that, Colin? Because I get really quite annoyed about this. So I'd like to calm down first.
Well, I think the problem with the term closed loop is it kind of ignores the fact that there are lots of players who should be operating in the system, like in natural systems. If an animal dies, it doesn't transform back into that same animal. It adds nutrients back into the soil, or of course, it's eaten by other insects and creatures who all benefit from this. And then you've got other players within natural systems like detritivores who break down all sorts of matter, and that adds benefits to the system. The point I'm driving at is that there are many players within a system. Our natural systems don't work as closed loops, but all of the different players within it all add value that ultimately regenerates that system, which is where we want to get to with a circular economy. So I think a term like closed loop can be a barrier to understanding the roles that people can
The
play.
only place it works, I think, is if somebody takes responsibility end to end for that material and actually takes responsibility for it, so that it's never really, might be never sold. It might be never go into the system in a sort of separated way, or even if it is sold, there's responsibilities logged. But that's the exception. As Colin was saying, most times these systems work by breaking things down and building them up through a number of players. So a firm can't expect to say, oh, I'm just going to close the loop and take some stuff back. That would be an unusual situation. It can be done, but it's not a defining thought about the circular economy.
Yeah, and is there a sort of misconception, as I say, about what we actually mean by the closed loop? Are we referring to closing the loop on the whole system, really? And is that where the misconceptions actually come from? People are assuming that closing the loop is actually about individuals rather than closing the loop on the system, as Colin said. This wouldn't happen in nature. They wouldn't close the loop. It's all about sharing. So presumably the implication is that closed loop would lead to be resource scarcity, or somebody having all the resources and nobody else being able to be a player in that system.
I think it's a reaction to the linear thing. Well, if we're not being linear, let's be closed loop. And they don't really adjust what scale it's operating on, whether it's for them or the system. And that's why I think it's quite nice when people say, look, let's make sure waste is food, so that anything that's put into the system is valuable for something else. And that in itself helps create the possibilities of a closed loop at different scales.
And that's valuable for something else,
Yeah.
somewhere else, who knows when else.
Yeah.
Do you have any sympathy for people, you're welcome not to, but do you have any sympathy with people who, there's a simplicity in the metaphor of a closed loop versus what Colin was saying about natural systems? That can seem quite intimidating in terms of, well, what do I do to fit in with this notion that it may be valuable to someone else in 100 years or whatever? Is that maybe why this word gets used, or this term kind of has emerged alongside circular economy?
But isn't circular economy a simplification? Like the term is a simplification of the entire system. That's what the term was chosen for, I believe. So we've already got a term that does that job. Why do we need another one that basically does the
Don't
same
go any
thing?
narrower.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move you along. Okay, closed loop. Some other word that comes up time and time again. Let's give Colin
I
a
get to pick.
chance. Yes.
Go on here.
There you go.
Right. Ecodesign. It says here, ecodesign can drive a circular economy. I guess the first thing I think of when I hear the term ecodesign is, what is it? Like, what are the principles that drive ecodesign? What's the ultimate goal of ecodesign? Because I find terms like this are quite ill-defined in the sense that you see it being applied to all sorts of different products and design principles that aren't, in some cases, necessarily eco.
So what's your understanding of the word eco-design? Do you have an understanding of what it might mean?
For me, it tends to mean something that's better to some degree than the status quo, but not necessarily something that's good. And so there's a difference between those two endpoints. So good would be useful for the entire system, beneficial perhaps in an environmental sense, whereas good is it's the classic cradle-to-cradle thing, isn't it? Doing less bad isn't the same as good.
Eco-design implies that the priority of that design is to make it more environmentally or ecologically friendly, and de-emphasizes the importance of that design also being a better product than whatever it's replacing, and needing to fit within a wider system or a business model. So I think it shifts your thinking towards only those environmental factors, which are obviously important, but not the whole product.
Without the holistic system. Is it more about a feeling of incremental change rather than systems change?
Well, some of it can be pretty profound. I don't have any problem with playing with it, but it is very often characterized by looking at the footprint, saying the impact on carbon and other resource use. But a circular economy might not fit so easily with that, because you get many uses in many ways. Like a building designed for disassembly might not be of itself that eco, but over a number of cycles of different use, it becomes very resource efficient or effective. So I don't know about driving the circular economy. It's got a role to play there, but it's too simplistic to say it drives a circular economy.
I think in addition, products or ideas that have eco as a prefix are problematic, because if you don't identify yourself as an eco person, then you might naturally be put off some of those ideas. And there are plenty of people who aren't interested in eco arguments.
Is there a replacement word that you'd like to use?
Well,
or
good design. How
good
about that?
design.
Good design can drive a circular economy. Yeah,
Yeah.
In other words, it is a design-driven thing, but Cradle to Cradle would say it's their sort of thing. They want a cradle-to-cradle design, which it takes it further than just straight eco-design. The way the words evolve to give a more nuanced meaning, I think this is an example where we're moving a bit beyond eco-design to talk about it in more sophisticated ways.
Right.
We do use the term circular design as a
Circular
subset
design.
for design for circular economy.
Well, certain people near here do quite a bit of that. I'm not so sure about you to put circular on everything. It's saying, let's have circular education. Oh, really?
Sounds like my education
Yeah,
already.
it was all right, yes. Very repetitive. Yeah. I think one has to be careful about just blocking things, of course, onto an idea so that everything becomes circular, or circular business, circular design, whatever. I think it needs to be very often nuanced. You need a strap line with that to give a better idea what you mean. But hey, we've got to work with the words we've got. We're trying to be moving in a certain direction.
But is that the problem, Ken, that we're trying to use and work with the words that we've got? Do we need to create some new terminology here, some new...
Well, there's always a
words?
love for jargon, isn't there? If you've got your own jargon, it's your own club you belong to, and then who's in it knows the jargon, who's not doesn't know the jargon.
We're in it.
We're in it, yes. We've got some jargon and stuff.
Yeah.
But it has to be communicatable enough
Clearly.
to move the debate on a bit. And the words we're using now will not be the ones that are used in 10 years' time, probably, because it will evolve again. Because you're seeing, for instance, the CSR, corporate
Social responsibility.
social responsibility, being replaced by just responsible business. It is a little bit better when you say responsible business. Some people say, well, that's circular economy, isn't it? It's a responsible business. And it's very hard to say no to that, but that might be an evolution of corporate social responsibility to make it more in tune with the times, because CSR feels a little bit, well, it feels a bit 70s to me.
You fancy choosing a word?
I could,
You're moving on.
I could try.
You try. Come on. I made these this afternoon. Do you like the design?
I think I can tell you made these this afternoon.
Oh, come on.
Is that one?
That's one.
That's
yeah.
one. Sustainability. I've got a winner.
We were
Yes,
all
yes.
waiting to get that
The
one.
sustainable use of resources is key to achieving a circular economy. Well, it's the S word, sustainability.
Give us your thoughts, Ken.
On that one. It would really depend on what you think the circular economy is about. If people see it as a toolbox, as a way of achieving something, the aim is outside the circular economy. You know, circular economy is how you do it, and what is your aim in the end? Well, some people would say, I want sustainability to be my end, or I want an equitable society to be my end. Can or cannot the circular economy as a toolbox help you get there? And I think that's been one of the advantages for those people who want to use the circular economy and point towards perhaps a broader or a more values-laden outcome. They can say, well, the circular economy, and Europe does this, and the Pope did this. The Pope said something along the lines of, we want a low-carbon, circular and sustainable economy. Let's get all three terms in there, and we're doing okay. But the values might be outside the circular economy for some people, and sustainability could be seen as the end point. I don't like that so much because I think there's some inherent value in the circular economy as an approach using systems theory and the rest of it that might say something about the way the economy works, which is useful. It's not just a toolbox for me. But you see quite a lot of that, and so they can sit together. The important thing is whether it makes, whether it has an economic advantage too. Walter's very keen on this. All the time the circular economy has to be something that would mean something within the economy, not just a way of saying the economy's not quite so good and shall we clean it up. It's more profound than that. Anyway,
so,
that's my thing. I don't know what others think.
Yeah. Seb, do you think the circular economy and sustainability are two words that can sit together side by side, or do you have a problem with that?
I've never written them together and side by side. I mean, like the famous line on it, of course, is Michael Braungart's, which is that, you know, sustainability isn't a particularly ambitious goal. You know, he jokes that if you're asked to comment on your relationship and you said it was sustainable, you would say, oh dear, as opposed to celebrating that. So it's fundamentally not a goal. It's not something to aim for. While circular economy is something quite tangible that you can do. The other thing I think that's kind of interesting about that topic, and maybe some of the other words that's relevant as well, is that for me anyway, the way I think unsustainable use of resources is a symptom of something else that is happening. And that's also the problem with when we talk about zero waste or waste, is that actually that is caused by some underlying things that actually the way the economy works, where we take stuff out of the ground and make it and it becomes waste ultimately. So I think that actually if you're only talking about how do you become sustainable, you're not talking about what is sitting under that unsustainable use of resources, which is the way the world functions or the way the economy functions.
And I think that's a great point about sustainable isn't about a positive cycle necessarily. It might be for some people, but it looks like let's hang on to what we've got. Whereas the positive sense of rebuilding natural and social capital sits on top of that, and building economic capital too.
Yeah, even the Brundtland Commission line about sustainability, which is what is it, to meet our needs of today without compromising the needs of tomorrow, or something like that. It just suggests things should stay the same as opposed to improve. And there's so many different ways that people define sustainability. Same with eco, that the question in front of us is it a useful term to help us understand the circular economy? I think the answer is no.
Great, I think we're probably in agreement, although you haven't heard my comments yet, but I shall move on because we've got a couple of, quite a few more cards to get through. We might not get through them all, that's absolutely fine. Seb, it's your turn again. How things get round quickly. Let's go for the middle one.
Consumer behaviour. We will never achieve a circular economy until people change their behaviour and consume less. That's not true. so we don't need to discuss it really. No, I mean, so for me, what I always think about is that actually people didn't. There's not the case that people chose to consume more. That was it comes back to the point I think I was just making, that actually what we see as consumerism or people wanting to have stuff, that is a symptom of the way in which the economy is designed. If you want firstly the desire to have things is a bit of a symptom of having an economy where to make money we have to make lots of things, so we need to be able to sell lots of things to people. And the second thing is, at the moment, in order to have the things that are considered affable or desirable, you have to own them, so you have to kind of consume them inevitably in a make waste. So for me, consumer behaviour is not a key factor in driving change in the economy, and I don't think there's any evidence of that in the history of the way that our world has changed.
You going to add something there? Or
No, I was just going to say it was interesting that that's actually in terms of businesses, that's an area that they're really focusing on.
Well,
why are they doing that?
And consumer behaviour is important in the sense that it will change, even if it's shifting towards use rather than ownership, for example. But I think the card is trying to suggest that we all change our minds about behaving in this particular way as though we were guilty about something. I think that's part of that old sustainability idea, whereas they will change their behavior by designing better goods and services which fit a circular economy and meet their needs and wants at a way lower resource cost. And I think that's one of the attractions of a circular economy. It says, don't get on your guilty horse or whatever. You know, don't wear these dark clothes and be miserable all day. It is look for or celebrate better design, shifting from goods to services, meeting needs in a whole variety of ways, everything from collaborative consumption to grow your own food. It's supposed to be a celebration of life. Otherwise, it turns into a guilt thing, which people go, oh, well, you know, I can't enjoy my life and it's hard enough already. So I don't want to see it as a you can change your mind rather than you can buy better stuff or better services.
But are you seeing people, the ultimate goal is people are changing how they're accessing stuff?
Their behavior is changing, yes.
But the reason for that is not driven by guilt or lifestyle choice, but by better options that are on the table.
That's for the bulk. There's always a group of people who will change because they've made the choice. But I think it's quite remarkable with humans how much they're full of habits. They've always done that thing, or they always like that sort of product. Well, it's down to the producers and designers to make them a better offer and make a better business proposition while they're doing it.
Do you think the Netflix versus Blockbuster is like a good example of like behavior change? That a better option was on the table. You can watch it in your telly without getting off your couch. But people didn't make that choice. Wouldn't it be nice if there were fewer DVD boxes and a store taking them up? They just had a better way to access films and TV series.
They wanted to see films, and Netflix was a better
Blockbuster
option.
famously didn't invest in Netflix because they thought that people would miss the experience of going to the shop and feeling the DVDs.
Really?
How foolish must they feel now?
Well, they're not around anymore, so
Well,
hopefully they're doing
absolutely.
better things.
Everybody ready for the next word?
Yes, please.
Okay, right. Who is it? Is it?
Collins.
Colin, go on.
I'm going to go for the top one.
The top one. What's that one?
Recycling. The circular economy is about being able to recycle more and recycle better. So we do hear that a lot, of course. And there would be more recycling in a circular economy, I believe. But it has its place. And it has its limitations as a way to achieve a circular economy. And one of the barriers I find quite often, been in this job for 8 years, getting people to understand what a circular economy is that they quickly jump to, it's about recycling. And they stay in that mindset that all we have to do is sort our waste better, put it into the right bins. We've just been through a process where we were interviewing people for an education program that we're running, and quite a lot of them are absolutely in this mindset that we need to be sorting our rubbish and putting it into the right bins, and that will bring us a circular economy. So I think it's a real barrier.
But organisations like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation still talk about recycling. So when is recycling good and when is it not?
They call it the loop of last resort.
Ooh,
Ooh,
that's,
that's a nice cliche, isn't it?
like a great
When you
title
haven't
for a
done
film.
everything else you might have done that preserves value or shares value, yeah, of course, because nobody beats the second law of thermodynamics. In the end, it's going to be a form of waste, but it should be, in the way that it's usually discussed, it should be food for another system, rather than waste that's really, really hard to handle. So there's all those other steps that Ellen MacArthur Foundation and others talk about before you get to the recycling, which usually means different business models, which usually means different ways of getting additional value, both for the customer and for the producer.
Seb, do you have a problem with this word?
Recycling.
You
Well,
know.
I don't have a problem with the word. I agree with Colin's point that it quickly becomes distracting because recycling was kind of a key bastion of not circular economy. See, this happens even to me. Of sustainability. The recycling symbol is kind of very much associated with that lifestyle, and also is a mechanism that can shift responsibility to people who are consuming products. Going back to the consumer behaviour, it's up to people to recycle their bottles. It's not up to the organisations or designers to make those things inherently better things in the first place.
So you're saying it's a little bit like closed loop. It's a word that people find easy to understand, and so they take that and unfortunately they run with it, and then it becomes a little bit of a kind of sort of concrete round their neck in a way, in terms of then trying to really describe what the circular economy is.
It's this. There's a whole era we've lived through, which is all about the individual and individual responsibility. And it was very easy to say to individuals, we'll design this really pretty rubbishy packaging, which you can't really do much with. We'll encourage you to recycle it because you're a responsible citizen. And if you feel guilty because you're not doing it, well, all to the good, because it reminds you that you should be a good citizen. Rather than saying, we've designed a packaging that dissolves happily into any compost heap at the appropriate time, and you really don't have to think about it any more than just throwing it in that receptacle for composting. And no guilt involved, really. It's just I aim it there, and even when they do the recycling, we know what happens to much of it. It's the act of recycling that they're doing. It's not actually taken up and done anything with. Very often, huge amounts go into incineration or sent to other countries. Oh, they can deal with it. Oh, very good one. So it's almost like a little 3-act play for consumers. They get guilty, they do their best, but it doesn't work, but at least they've done their best, and then we can all carry on with our lives.
And of course, it just assumes it was waste in the first place, and nobody really needs to change the system because
No,
we
that's
can
right.
just
It's not about
recycle
changing
it.
the system.
Not about
It's about
changing the
reinforcing
system.
it, because only recycling encourages you to be totally linear. Oh, I can buy any old stuff because, of course, it
Just
gets
chuck it.
recycled.
Yeah.
What did we find out with the work we did in plastics? Like 40 years after the launch of the recycling logo, only 14%, is it 14% of plastic packaging was actually recycled?
I
Is it
think
that
it's
much?
collected for recycling,
It's
isn't
collected
it? And then
for
about 7% is actually recycled. So
And in fact, like if you only look at the recycling piece of that story, there's many initiatives now that are springing up that are looking to clean up beaches and build up recycling infrastructure in places like Southeast Asia. There's no way that you can build that infrastructure to compete with the amount that's actually being produced if you only look at that piece. How are you actually designing this so that all this infrastructure isn't necessary?
but surely recycling's got to be part of the transition. We can't move.
Part of it, but not all of it.
Not all of it. But if we only set our goal at recycling, then what you're saying is then that's not really a great vision
It's not
to
going
be
to work.
working towards.
Walter pointed this out a long time ago, Walter Stahel. You know that even at 90% recycling, for a short cycle good with low value, within about 7 cycles, you've lost half of that material at 90% recycling, and double that and you've almost lost it all. So if it was a 3-week cycle, 7 3s are 21 weeks, double it 42 weeks, in about a year, you've lost all that material at 90% recycling. Hey, result, eh? No, it's not a result. It's an illusion that something has happened. Whereas if that material lasted, say, 12 years and in a productive way, 7 12s are, well, 80.
Ooh,
A lot.
I've started to think though that what you just said there is part of the problem.
84,
That and I've been in that position many times where people say, "Well, recycling." I'm like, "Well, of course it's got a place in the circular economy, and of course it's the loop of last resort." Sometimes I wonder if it'd be clearer if I just said, "No, it's not part of the circular economy. Forget about it."
Or it's a sign very often of a badly designed product or material. If it's got a short cycle and low value, what are you really trying to tell me? Here that we just try harder? That fits with the individual thing. Try harder. Let's all go down the beach and clean it up. Yes, great. 3 weeks later,
It's all back again.
it's all back again, and you've got another load of stuff.
And we're talking, of course, about simple materials, like monomaterial stuff.
Yeah,
We're recycling the TV behind us, the lights, etc.
gets even.
It's even more complicated.
There is a role for plastics, of course, but it's hard to see where it is in just the quick cycle stuff. Because
Feel it might be time for another.
yeah, give it a
word.
card. Give it a card.
Oh, is it your turn
Yeah.
or is it Seb?
No, it's my turn.
Is it
Ken.
Ken?
Ken's turn.
Oh, I'm glad
I'll
someone's
have
paying
this
attention.
one. Right, resource efficiency. If we can use fewer resources, we can create a restorative and regenerative economy. What's the difference between efficiency and effectiveness? That is sort of a rhetorical question in a way.
Tell our audience. What do you think, Ken, is the
Well-
difference between efficiency and effectiveness? This one gets the most kind of,
Does it friction going?
friction
yes.
going in our.
If we're resource efficient, it's a relationship between input and output. You want to try and reduce or maximize the relationship between the input and the output. It doesn't say what the purpose of the system is. It's just a simple relationship between in and out. Now, an effective system, like your bloodstream, it's got a job to do.
Apparently
and you can,
so.
apparently, even in your veins, I'm afraid, there may be blood. If it circulates properly, it has to reach all parts of your system. You can't do without your toes, or you can for a short while, but it's not a great plan. The purpose is to deliver nutrients, extract waste products. It's got a job to do, and it's in relation to your whole body. Now, they can't describe that as efficiency, or else you'd just have your heart, and you'd have the arteries and the veins, perhaps, because they're the efficient bits. They carry a volume backwards and forwards. But, of course, all your cells need that service too. And that would make it effective, not just efficient. Because when it goes through the capillaries, it almost stops the flow. The flow almost stops. It's an exchange function happening there. It's not efficient, but wow, it's very effective. And it's also effective because you can take the damage in the periphery. You can damage these blood vessels, and it's not good night Vienna. It's something you just get a bruise with. So an effective system is one that can endure with a variety of shocks and also reach to all of the parts and have a purpose. That's a way off a resource efficiency. You can't recreate a restorative and regenerative economy because there's no sense that resource efficiency says you're going to close the loop. You're just going to reduce the amount of resources used.
Colin, do you have a problem with this word? I mean, what do you say when people mention the word resource efficiency, particularly in the context of trying to convince people that this is about restorative and regenerative?
Yeah, I say what Ken says, but much less eloquently.
True.
I recognise it is a term that people use a lot in relation to circular economy, and like with everything else, recycling, eco-design, etc., what you don't want to do is dampen people's enthusiasm for it. You want to find a way to use a term like resource efficiency as a talking point to talk about some of those bigger issues, like really what like it's the outcome we should be aiming for, which is effectiveness.
And this is a big danger, isn't it? Because you get people, if they choose the words carefully, will really just, when they're trying to say circular economy, they're really just describing a resource efficient, do less harm, do a few token loops type economy. It's nothing profound in it. It's just repackaged, whereas the words we're trying to use suggest living systems. It draws insights from living systems, metabolisms, rebuilding capital. All of these are key to a circular economy, which are way from, oh, let's do a bit of resource efficiency. Good as it is, it doesn't get you to rebuilding capitals.
And on a pure economic point as well, there's certainly an example we used to use about copper in car doors, that making that process more efficient, putting in less and less copper in order to operate the window, meant that it just wasn't economical to extract that copper at the end of the car's life.
Do you know what happened next about that steel?
No.
Michael Braungart went to Turkey. There was a huge earthquake in 1999. And it was copper in steel makes it brittle. And he sampled the steel, and it had collapsed because of the contamination of copper, or contributed to it. So it's not just, oh, that's not, you haven't recovered the copper. Leaving it as a contaminant is implicated in the death of thousands of people.
On that note, sadly, we're coming to the end. It's gone by very quickly, I've got to say, and it's clear that around this table we've got an issue with some of the words, perhaps some more than others. So what I thought was, before we finish and wrap up, is I'm going to give you the chance to select one of the words that we've had today. So let's put them all in the middle and banish that one word to the shredder, never to be mentioned before. These are actually ones we haven't mentioned. Oh, and the shredder cue's come in too early, but that's fine. Choose one word, just one word that you want to, you'd really like to banish to the...
I've got mine, John.
You got yours. What are you going to throw it into the middle of the table?
I'm picking Ecodesign. I think it's a meaningless term, and it gets it has a barrier to people who don't identify themselves as eco-type people actually using these products.
Okay.
I think it's not useful at all.
Get it into the middle of the
Get
table.
in there. Go
Okay,
on.
what are you
I've got
banishing?
one we haven't talked about, but waste management. It's about resources and materials management. It's not about waste management.
Yeah. Resource efficiency for me, I do find this a really irritating term, which is just all about is doing more with less, rather than, as Ken was saying, about having an effective system. So that's my shredded
Consumer behaviour.
Consumer behaviour.
about
Okay,
making people
now
guilty.
cue the shredder. Okay, all of those
fingers.
into the shredder, never to be mentioned again until the next time we all meet over a beer to discuss these.
Get rid of
Okay, get rid of those. Okay, so sadly it is time to wrap up now. I hope you've enjoyed this little exploration into a couple of the words and terms that we discuss. What do you think? Are words and terms that we choose important? Do they have the power to drive action in the wrong direction, perhaps, so to the wrong vision of something? Or is it just semantics? I'm going to leave you with two thoughts. Firstly is a description of the circular economy which I downloaded from the internet just before we started this session. And I want you to go away and have a conversation with people around you about whether you've changed your mind. This is just a definition. I'm not going to tell you where it comes from, but it's the concept of a circular economy isn't new. End waste and limit environmental damage through efficiency, smart design, and comprehensive recycling. The aim of the circular economy is to optimize resource yields in the economy and, as a consequence, minimize the creation of waste. That's just one definition. Following our, to shake your heads here, following our discussions here,
Words have been binned.
is that a good definition? Have you changed your mind? And the second thing I want to leave you with is, obviously, for the observant amongst you, we've been talking about circular economy in English and primarily British English. Does this resonate with people, these same concepts, does that resonate with people in different languages? I don't know, but one thing I do know is that I was recently in China, and interestingly, the word for recycling is exactly the same word for reuse. So how do they distinguish between those two things, which are very important in circular economy? I'd like to thank my guests and friends and colleagues for joining me, and of course you behind the camera in this broadcast. Thank you very much, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. Thank you.
Cheers, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.